Human dung jokes in the New Testament. The lump of dung. Bear in mind that when these jokes were originally discovered by us, that we were not yet entirely convinced that there was a counterpart to them. And as such, we were unaware at that time that these particular jokes were indeed dirty, and even sick. We did think that some were self-deprecating, but it was not until we found with certainty that some of the other jokes that these jokes were cross-referenced with were indeed dirty, bawdy, and/or sick that it became apparent that other jokes were likewise intended to be that way as well, by the authors themselves. If the first fruit is holy, the lump is also holy. Romans 11:16. The authors of the New Testament texts were not holy, and of course, they knew that those who had written the first fruit, or the texts, now known to us as the Torah, or Old Testament texts, were likewise written by men who were not holy. But they were all pretending to be, while the whole time making jokes and irreverent comments throughout their works. When one knows that the New Testament is a mass of mixed things that were written by various members of the Piso family, then one is also able to make out the many jokes that were placed in the New Testament by this same family. And since these authors of the New Testament were the descendants of the deliverers of the first fruit of their ancestors, namely Judaism, the Pisos felt that they had the right to make a new religion if they so wished, and that they were free to destroy the old or original one, or remake that old one over again to be new, and to match up to the New Testament. And this they also did, as they created the Greek Septuagint so that it would be representative of the Old Testament, and so that there would be that version of the earlier texts that matched the new works that they had created in authoring the New Testament. In this joke, they refer to the New Testament as the lump, which literally meant the word as farama, a mass of mixed things. The reason that we can now know that the phrase, the lump, also has another meaning that allows us to read it as the lump of dung, is because of the discovery of the other sick and filthy jokes that were also found in the New Testament that relate to this one, and that any scholar should cross-reference this one too. This word farama was also used to describe dough that was mixed and ready to be baked into bread. A true and fuller meaning of this joke is now seen as it relates to the joke that was made regarding the miracle of the fishes and loaves. It is recommended that future scholars gain a full and deep understanding and familiarity with ancient history, particularly of the time in which the New Testament was written and just prior to it, so that one may have the ability to recognize when certain persons and/or instances are being alluded to in the New Testament. Also, in the true authorship of the New Testament, page 12, for the meaning and allusion surrounding the Latin word pister, for one who grinds flour with to bake bread, and furred, in other words, pister, meaning Piso, who is referred to as the baker of bread, or more specifically, the baker of the dung bread. Remember, these are not interpretations, they are scholarly deductions based upon facts in evidence. With the majority of jokes that relate to one another, these deductions are verified and become empirical evidence, or that evidence that would come out eventually as more and more is learned about the actual facts regarding the truth about the New Testament, as having been devised by Rome, for about the actual facts regarding the truth about the New Testament as having been devised by Rome for political purposes. Fishes and loaves, as severed penises and lumps of dung, or dung bread. This is supposed to appear to the reader as a miracle that Jesus had made in order to feed a large group of persons. But this is really a veiled attempt by the authors to brag about what they did when they took advantage of the desperate situation of the Jews during the war. Flavius Josephus, who was the main author of the New Testament, particularly the Gospels, who was really a Roman named Arius Piso, played Jesus in the story. But as Josephus, he writes of the war and the horrors of that war. He writes at length about the Jews being so starved that they would eat anything at all that they could find. Well, the Romans, knowing this, took sick and cruel advantage of that situation. These jokes tell us exactly what they did. They cut off the penises of their enemies and flung those over the walls at Jerusalem, so that if those poor starving Jews wanted to eat, this is all that they would have, or to start eating each other. The Romans deliberately kept the situation desperate for them. The Jews who were trapped at Jerusalem were kept trapped within the city walls for an extended amount of time, and no food was allowed in. Those who wanted to surrender were taken, tortured and/or dismembered. Those who were lucky enough to be left alive were taken back to Rome to die in the circus or to live the rest of their lives as cruelly treated slaves. In addition to cutting of the penises of their enemies, the Romans collected the urine of the troops and filled animal bladders with it, and that was called wine. This too was flung over the walls for the Jews to consume. By this time, the Jews were probably so delirious with hunger and thirst that they may not have even noticed or cared what they were drinking and eating. And, just as they had done with the urine of the troops, they also collected their excrement, dung. But this, they apparently took the extra step of baking it. They probably did add a little flour to it, and they may have even put other horrid things in it such as barbs of various kinds, as they knew that those Jews were so hungry that they would eat it very fast without examining it fully first. This is the true way that these particular enemies of the Romans were treated. And, of course, knowing what they had done to those people who were starving to death, the Roman soldiers laughed at what had been done, particularly those generals and other commanders who had planned and anticipated this very situation. This was just the most wonderful miracle that Jesus, Arius Piso, had performed. So, they could not help but brag about it in all four of the Gospels. Mark 6:38, 41, 43, Matthew 14:15, 17, 19, 15:32, 34, 36, Luke 5:6, 9:13, 16, John 6:9, 21, 6. This too is a cross-referenced joke, so look for the other jokes that are interrelated to this one for supplemental or additional information regarding this joke, and vice versa. Yes, again, this is the true nature of the New Testament, which is very far from being what many millions of people had imagined it to be. By the way, the surviving Jews who went on to write in the Talmud wrote in the Talmud using their own version of royal language, and also secretly stated there what they knew about these things, that there might be confirming information from another source that this was indeed the truth and that the world might know that this is so. Fish was also identical with erect, as in erect penis. In fact, in the word for fish, penis is inferred because this meaning relates directly to the ithy-phallic, erect penis god, or shameless god, who was called Min in Egypt. Remember too, that Jesus is represented as a fish secretly, penis, and that the Pisos are referred to as the minimum by the Jews in the Talmud. Min was the ithy-phallic god of Egypt, and of Crete, where the inhabitants were called Minoans, i.e., Min, Oan. Nun, or fish, represented both male and or female sex organs, because nuns, who were temple prostitutes of both sexes at Paphos in the island of Cyprus, was so famous for these nuns that the word paphia became synonymous with prostitute, both male and female. And Paphos and Paphia represented the male and female sex organs, as well as the male and female prostitutes maintained at temples. So, nun, or fish, appears to represent sex organs, also in the generic sense. Human dung, baked into bread. The researcher, author, Professor Randall Helms, is what we would term a transitional classical scholar. This means that he has inadvertently stumbled upon items that relate to the new classical scholarship, but he apparently does not, or did not, know the true and full meanings of those things that he had noticed and commented upon. We class him with others such as Jacob Neusner and the late Ronald Syme, all of whom are most expert, excepting in the fact that they had not yet written anything for the public that goes beyond what the old classical scholarship may accept and condone. It is Professor Randall Helms who wrote about the bread baked with human excrement in it. This, on page 21 of his Gospel Fictions, as the prelude to his prophetic role, Ezekiel has a series of visions. In the first of them, he sees the heavens open, Ezekiel 1:1 Peter, about to receive his prophetic commission to go to the Gentile Cornelius, also sees in a vision the heaven opened. Acts 10:11. In his next vision, Ezekiel is shown something and told to eat. Ezekiel 2:9 Similarly, in Peter's vision he is shown something and told to eat unclean food, bread baked with human dung. But the prophet strongly demurs, saying, "By no means, Lord." Acts 10:14. Now, It may well be that this incident with unclean bread and bread baked with human dung may be the true source for references and practices involving unleavened bread. Bread baked with human dung, but no yeast would not rise. The Romans really took advantage of the situation when the Jews were starving and eating things that one would not imagine eating. Something that apparently is never said outright in ancient history, but what is alluded to in the works of Flavius Josephus. However, there are many hints and allusions to this in both Roman and Jewish histories as well as in the New Testament itself. When one knows about these things, then one also begins to realize that just saying the word bread was a dig at the Jews, Pharisees and their allies, and a sick joke at their expense. Because the authors of the New Testament were saying that they had proved that if the Jews were hungry enough that they would eat anything, even unclean and otherwise unimaginable things. Arius Piso and the other New Testament authors were making fun of the starving Jews in Jerusalem, just prior to the destruction of the temple, having had to eat the bread made with or of human dung that the Romans flung it to them. Acts 10:13, and there came a voice to him, Rise Peter. Arise, penis. Kill and eat. Acts 10:14. But the now erect penis Peter said, In no way, Lord, Lord, also meaning penis, but also curious, or unknown. For I never did have to inferred eat anything common and unclean. Dung, in the vulgar form is inferred here. Some other demonstrable references to this are Acts 10:10. And he became very hungry, and would have eaten anything, or dung, is inferred. And 2 Corinthians 6:17, Wherefore come out from the midst of them, and be known as the separated, says the Lord, curious, unknown God, and the unclean thing bread inferred touch not. The Pharisees are known as the separated ones. They are obviously referred to here. Lord means curious, unknown, and refers to God, i.e., the unknown God, as in the unknown God that you ignorantly worship, Acts 17:23. The unclean bread inferred alludes to the bread baked with human dung and is used in a sentence that also alludes to the Jews, specifically the Pharisees. Mark 7:2. And having seen some of his followers with defiled hands, that were unwashed, and eating bread, they, the Pharisees, found fault. For the Pharisees and all of the Jews, at this time, inferred, unless with the fist they wash the hands, eat not, holding the tradition of the elders. Now we see and understand the full and true meaning of things that were previously thought of as actually quite trivial for all of the thought, time and effort that was put into the subject of washing hands before meals. Philippians 3:8, But yes, without doubt, and with high honor, I count the loss of all things, that I had or might have had, inferred and perhaps, upon death, also being inferred, as but loss for the excellent knowledge of my Lord, unknown God, unknown to the masses, that is, Jesus Christ, for whom I have willingly suffered the loss of all of these things, and I do count them as but what, the dung, was that I might gain my place with Christ Jesus. Josephus, in fame, infamy forever, inferred. One day, there will be a new annotated version of the New Testament and the Greek Septuagint from the original Greek language that will reveal all of the things that were actually written in this originally, that will show the full truth to the public once and for all. Daily bread, daily lump of dung. Matthew 6:11. Give us this day our daily bread. Think of the centuries that so many have thought this to be a solemn and faithful statement, the many who put their full trust into this statement and used it before each and every meal, never knowing the true meaning of what they were uttering. Jesus is the living bread. John 6:35. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. And John 6:51. I am the living bread. He is bread, because like the bread that he had baked for his enemies, the Jews at Jerusalem, he too is full of human excrement. Jesus himself becomes representative of the bread of life, that was really bread baked with human excrement, as was explained, that was given to those poor starving Jews who were at Jerusalem so as to be a tortuous prelude to their eventual slaughter by the Romans. Since we now know that bread is synonymous with the lump, and the lump in turn is synonymous with dung, then we know to read this as it was truly meant. Give us this day our daily lump of dung, with dung, of course in its vulgar form, so as to pique their sick enjoyment of this particular joke. This was the humor of the authors of the New Testament. They make solemn for the masses. Things that are in actuality really sick and filthy, inside. Jokes are jokes that only they understood. This is the ultimate insult to humanity after having committed the perfect, or near-perfect crime against it. The creation of Christianity and the New Testament, as well as what was done in that war against the Pharisees and scribes, was indeed a crime against humanity. In terms of the damage done to humanity and our progress, taking into account how many years it has impacted the world, is very easily far worse than what Hitler and the Nazis did during World War II. And this is why the truth must now be known to all. James Ballantyne Hannay, who had worked on the Oxford Encyclopedia Biblica, made note in his own works of the truth about the use of sex words in the Bible, and often quoted from and referenced the Encyclopedia Biblica, which was compiled by the most scholarly and knowledgeable professors of Oxford University, so that the true nature of the Bible and its meanings would be decipherable and known to scholars once and for all. Unfortunately, it had become targeted for suppression and destruction by those who were opposed to the information getting out to the world. Nearly all copies of it were destroyed over the course of years, some by zealous or fanatical Christians, and some by Nazis, and still others by bombings and book burnings. If copies still exist, they would be rare. At least one is supposed to still exist in the rare books section of Oxford University, and perhaps another may be in the British Museum or the rare books section of the London Library. In any case, these word meanings were once known to academic scholarship for about 40 years, from about 1890 till about 1930.
Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.